Mike Palmer here, joined by my colleague Dan Stratford. Dan, welcome to the music show.
I'm glad to be here, ready to talk some music.
Oh, music, yeah. And you're gonna bring the paralinguistic aspect to your voice, right?
Always.
Yeah, you're gonna emote. People are gonna hear sounds. It'll be wonderful. And as if that were not enough, we already had some time with Brandon, who unfortunately can't be with us for this segment, but we're able to bring in a special guest. So Ken or Kenny,
either one,
or even Kenneth,
yeah,
all three of those things. Florence is joining us. That was Ken just talking. Welcome to the show, Ken.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So Ken's our special guest for this segment, and you're someone who's been connected to music, I guess pretty much throughout your life. Is that right?
Whole life.
Yeah. Can you talk to our listeners about Ken's story, or Ken's lifetime learning and music, how those two things come together?
Sure, I'll give it a try. So I'm a composer, multi-instrumentalist, producer, and teacher, actually. And I've been playing music since I was a kid. And after high school, I got really lucky with the band I was in called Annuals and got signed to a major record label.
And you were, it was like Kenny Florence and the Annuals, right? You were kind of like, you were the front
I was
man.
not the front man.
Okay.
I was not the front man. I was side man.
Okay.
Lead guitar player is what I'm credited with in most of the recordings.
So you were like Slash to some other Axl Guns N' Roses thing here?
In many ways, I was like Slash. In many ways, I was not like Slash.
That's probably a good
thing for my career.
It's probably true. It's probably true of all of us if you really think about it. But yeah, so you were part of the Annuals.
Yeah, so I did that for about 6 years after high school. After a very, very brief stint in art school, actually, I should mention.
Got it.
And I kind of just started to feel sort of disillusioned with the indie band lifestyle.
Yep.
And I decided to go back to school and learn composition. And so I did that through my master's.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm a working composer, musician, and teacher here in New York City. I score films and commercials in a freelance capacity. I work for Manhattan Prep.
Yeah.
On their media team.
Sure.
Doing a lot of scoring and just kind of general audio work.
Yep.
And I teach guitar and piano lessons.
Yeah. So a lot of bona fides. We call those bona fides. So you have a lot of angles into music, teaching music, composing music. All those things are really interesting. And we've been thinking a lot about the relationship between music and learning, right, and some of the research into where music can enhance learning, and how music is sort of deeply wired into different aspects of our cognition and our brains. You were mentioning also that you see music as well. Like there's this notion or this I guess neurological phenomenon. I don't know exactly the right. You'll help me land some of this in a second, but called synesthesia. And that's something that you do. You have synesthesia, or you are synesthetic? Like, what's the right way to talk about this?
Well, either one of those works. I think you can say that you have synesthesia, or that you are. I think the noun form is synesthete.
Sure.
You're a synesthete, or you could be synesthetic. I think those all work.
Sure.
To describe the phenomenon.
Yeah.
But it's like the involuntary cross-activation of a particular sensory modality,
mm-hmm,
not typically associated with the object of perception.
Sure.
So it basically, like for instance, looking at the number 2 and thinking blue.
Right.
Which for me would be false. But
right.
2 is actually red for me.
Okay.
I think the most common form of synesthesia exists between letters, numbers, and colors.
Okay.
So it's where you have this sort of fixed involuntary set of associations between letters of the alphabet, numbers, and certain colors.
Interesting. And then does that relate to music for you as well? Or
It does because notes are given alphabetical designations
interesting.
in our Western musical system.
Got it.
So every time I for instance, I think of the note A,
Yes.
it's yellow.
Ah.
Always.
And what if you think about it as like a note on a clef? Is that colorless, or is your sort of root understanding the letter, and then when you think of the letter, you get a color?
Yeah, the clef doesn't really change it because you could see the note A on any number of clefs,
Right.
And then for me, it's always yellow.
So you actually have like a Technicolor clef in your mind.
Pretty much, it's not. It's actually not that the pictorial representation of the note itself becomes yellow.
Right.
It's that it's like my mind is kind of partitioned.
Yes.
And I have both the note A and then just like the color yellow sort of in the abstract.
Wow, that's amazing.
Or, of yellow, like just sort of the idea of yellow is there.
Right.
Right. That's really interesting because like we one concept we've been kicking around, like we talk about neuromyths and like demystifying things, debunking things on the show a lot. One of the ones that really fascinates me is the I think this is actually a myth just because who knows how people make up the percentage, but the idea that we only use 10% of our brains.
Who knows where that comes from?
Yeah. But that's a good topic for a future show. But I feel like the idea that we're only aware of a very small aspect of how our brains function, because typically we can only pay attention to a very limited amount of stuff at any point in time. I think the science does back up that idea. But then folks like yourself who then like it's almost like this difference, we talk about diversity a lot too, and like this difference in terms of how your brain functions is actually advantageous to your sort of artistic orientation, your ability to compose. Is that a fair assessment, or I guess maybe it's just correlated as well?
Sure. I mean, that my synesthesia definitely informs my compositional process, but perhaps not so in a way that really translates to the listener.
Mm-hmm.
But it definitely helps me sort of get to where I'm going and make the moment to moment decisions I need to make to write a piece of music.
Yeah.
For instance, like when I'm considering like the track order of an album or a playlist, I would never put a song in the key of A as a third track ever, because for me that's a cognitive dissonance. And so that might lead to certain patterns that, might be sort of subconsciously perceptible to the listener.
Right.
And maybe like it informs kind of how my style comes across.
Yeah.
But probably not in a way that would be obvious.
Right. But it's almost like the kind of like that underlying pattern that you almost naturally and I guess almost unconsciously, but it's sort of a conscious perception, I imagine. So like that sets you up with a consistency and a patternicity that listeners pick up on, but it's driven by something that you don't feel as much conscious control over.
Right. That's exactly right.
Huh. Dan.
It's amazing to hear you talk about track list on a CD, as we live in a world now that individual songs are released and you get them sort of in piecemeal. But it does bring me back to the idea of the composition of the track list, right? Of how all of those songs feed into one another and how an entire album can live and breathe.
Mm-hmm.
You see, a connection that Mike and Brandon were talking about was the idea of having music on the background when you were studying. The idea of having, whether it's Mozart and the idea of a baby in the womb listening to classical music and thus being smarter, or when you're studying yourself, the idea of recall due to music. As we study, we're obviously studying for long lengths of time. The track base and how they flow into one another, the type of music. Do you see that in your own walk of life and how you go about things? that it does help you remember things, that one song going into another, not being distracting, just sort of being in the background? Or were you somebody who couldn't study with music on because of the way your brain worked?
I can't do it.
Yeah.
I think it's something that comes along with musical training. If
Sure.
you're trained to analyze everything you hear, well, it's really, really hard to tune it out and to just kind of make it part of the background. But I mean, I have a lot of students who tell me that they get a lot of help from putting music on the back, or certain genres of music on the background while they're studying. I think the classical music thing, I think there's something to that, because I think essentially classical music is a lot more directly pattern based than a lot of other forms of music. I mean, that's all music is pattern based, right? But classical music kind of like that's the point,
Right.
It's like the exploration of pattern as such, So I think that it doesn't necessarily maybe lead to specific like temporal connections in terms of like, what flows into what and how that bolsters the information that you're taking in. I think what it does is it just kind of fosters a general mindset, a general mindset that's kind of like, it puts you in the mind space of sort of contemplating pattern.
Sure. And I guess, go ahead, Dan.
It's the idea when you're driving, listening to classical music tends to calm you down and tends to be a better thing for traffic, whereas listening to, aggressive hard rock will bring up your ability to get upset and get angry at other drivers. I've seen studies and papers on that, and now they have to do larger samples. For you, Ken, personally, you just said, and I think it's a really interesting point, that you've been trained to study music and to sort of, when it's on the background, you want to focus on it, right? You want to sort of pick it apart and understand it. Do you find that music has helped you learn other things, like learning the music the way you have and the way you can dissect and understand it? Has it helped you in other ways, or maybe even has it hindered the way you learn how to change car oil, or how maybe I know you live in New York City, so that's not really the best example, but has it helped you in other ways to be more methodical in the way you learn things?
Sure. I mean, I think what it really does is it helps you get into flow states. If you have a regular practice of sort of achieving a certain kind of flow, and then you can apply that to other areas of your life.
And just to clarify, you mean flow based on the research of Mihalyi Csikszentmihalyi?
Yes, exactly that.
I'm just very proud that I can pronounce his last name. I had to spend time learning how to pronounce Csikszentmihalyi.
I'm not going to attempt it.
Yeah, it's
but
easy.
That sounds right.
It's like Csikszentmihalyi. It's actually not that hard, surprisingly. But it is surprisingly hard to get into a flow state. And then
music can help you get there.
For sure. Although your point earlier, I think, was interesting as well, in that since you're so tuned into music, it can almost start to inhibit the flow state, in that if you're trying to focus on anything else, it's almost occupying too much of your attention to allow you to have the cognitive focus on the thing that you want to be focused on.
Well, it can inhibit information processing, but it doesn't inhibit other activities which could benefit from a flow state themselves.
Yep.
So, like if I were changing the oil of my car, like that's kind of a mechanical process that I don't have to really use much brain power to do.
Sure.
And so I think having music on can sort of lend to the sort of rhythmic aspect of performing the task, and can definitely get you in a flow state that kind of where what you're doing kind of resonates with the music.
Yeah, and then the idea of a flow state, can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, it's kind of a cognitive modality that involves a release of deliberate action, or you could define it as the opposite of that.
Right.
It's deliberate action without effort.
Right.
So you're kind of you let go of your direct control over what's going on and kind of just allow the thing to perform itself.
Right.
Almost as like a detached observer.
For sure.
To the scene.
And it's frequently, like I've heard this described by musicians in a bunch of different ways. recently I saw Jay-Z interviewed by David Letterman, like that Netflix thing was going out there. And Jay-Z was talking about it more around flow, or like around lyrics. But he was saying there's those times when I'm, quote, in the pocket, is what he said, which I think that language he might have even picked up on that from like Coltrane and like jazz musicians. But the idea that like, and it's also like, I've heard it also talked about as a group, like when a group is in swing, or like when a group is like synchronized enough, like a band, it definitely works that way too, where like the individual gets into a flow state as an individual performer, but then also a group of musicians or a group of teammates can kind of get into a collective rhythm where they're just sort of performing optimally. Dan, you look like you're about to say
the San
something.
Antonio Spurs in basketball, like 3 or 4 years ago, the idea that they just all knew where the other was going to be and the plays just sort of ran themselves rather than needing real human influence. That's I hadn't thought of it from a learning perspective, like from that sort of higher level idea behind it. But that's really intriguing to think of. I equate it to athletics a lot of times from where I'm from personally, but it's intriguing to think of it as an actual learning way of getting into the flow of the learning. And,
Yeah. I think it's a performative thing is the way I think of it. So like it's sports, it's music, it's taking tests.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the music of indigenous cultures around the world is kind of centered around this collective act of music making.
Yep.
Which doesn't really like feature solo artists or like refined articulation of very specific musical patterns,
Right.
but more so the sort of like emergence of a collective flow.
Sure. It's like I was going to say like a flash mob, but it's actually the opposite of a flash mob. If a flash mob was actually spontaneous and people would just, start making music, in Grand Central at random, just because it emerges from the culture in like a way that's natural. It's like a drum circle, I guess, is the way I would think about it, where like that's more, I guess, what you're describing, where like there's even one in Brooklyn in Prospect Park, but like
I've seen that one.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like somebody starts, frequently like there's not even anybody doing anything. There might be just a couple people standing around, and somebody starts, playing one drum, somebody starts dancing, and then before you know it, by like, 6 o'clock on a Sunday night in Prospect Park in the summer, there's a whole party going on. And nobody was like, okay, Ken,
Right.
Can you please start hitting this drum in this particular way? And then Dan, can you start getting down in the way that only you can? Instead,
a very fair description.
Yeah, well, it's yeah, exactly. But that's fascinating. Yeah, and it is also like music does perform that function, I guess, in the other way too, right? Like so that when music is played to a group, it does get the group synchronized in a way that they wouldn't be otherwise. So like in terms of group performance, I'd be curious, maybe we could look for more research around that, but like,
Yep.
Does a group perform better? What types of tasks do groups perform better when there is shared music? And then at what point, Dan mentioned Muzak, whether intentionally or not at the top of this segment, but like at what point can the music actually like almost create a different vibe within a group? And that's something we're also curious about, I think, on this show too. So one of the things we hope our listeners will start to notice is maybe more of Ken's influence, more your influence as we get more sound from you, because that's one of the things we're really looking to do. Like, can that change the mood? Can that get everybody, can it trigger different thinking or different aspects of your cognition?
Really looking forward to being a part of that.
Yeah. Dan, I know you mentioned you had some musical anecdotes or component. There was something about being monotone, right?
I do. Yeah, I have a few. One is in high school. A long story short, my brother's a singer and an actor, so I always wanted to be a singer as well. In high school, I was monotone. I didn't hear notes. I was tone deaf and just couldn't hear notes. Joined the chorus, was able to mimic people, but was never able to hear them on my own. So I was never able to hit like notes on a page or understand where my voice was supposed to go. In college, I went to do radio, surprising. And I was monotone still. So my choral director from high school offered to give me voice lessons, singing lessons. And so every Saturday for 4 months, I went and met him for 2 hours, and we do voice lessons. And outside, on the other side of that, I was able to understand my vocal range. Still have trouble singing, I will admit that. But I can mimic people much better and mimic songs. And if I hear it once, I can sort of copy people singing. But vocally, singing really opened up my speaking voice and my ability to do radio and to do play-by-play in sports. So that was always something I didn't, going into it, I just was doing it for fun. I love the choral director. He was a great guy. He was actually a big Penn State football fan. So we talked more about sports, but over time, it really changed the way I was able to talk.
Right.
Which was interesting. And the other one is my daughter takes piano. And so, Ken, I want to sort of ask you this question. She is a bit mechanical in approach in everything. So she's very math oriented, very, 2 + 2 is 4, and I know it's 4. And so when it comes to piano, at first she was very much, and still is, these are the notes I play. These are the notes I play when I play them. Do you see, and this is growth mindset, I know, but do you see a development for someone who has that sort of approach to music, the improvisation side of it? Do you think that's a growth mindset that can happen where someone can open up a side of them that allows music to be more of the flow, more of the organic process? Or do you think it's sort of a way someone goes about it and approaches music that maybe she'll be more mechanical her whole life, which she's good at piano, not taking that away from her, but not exactly, you're not expecting jazz to flow from the fingers when she sits down at the piano.
In my personal experience teaching, people definitely seem to fall into two groups, right? The people like your daughter who are more mechanical in their approach, and the people who are more intuitive and improvisational in their approach. It's very, very rare for a person to cross back and forth between that bridge. There are very, very rare exceptions, like the Marsalis brothers, for instance, who are all actively involved in jazz and classical music, or maybe even like a Yo-Yo Ma, who does a certain degree of improvisation in his, in what he does. I
resisted the urge to say, "What'd you call me?" Yo-Yo Ma, the classical,
the cellist.
Yes.
But it's a definite path that you could go down, and you can really, really take that mechanical mindset and develop it into something wonderful.
Right.
I would. I hope I'm not offending anybody by saying this, but I would categorize most of the classical music world, as part of that camp.
Right.
I think most people who go into classical music and are train themselves to play music from a page, from interpreting symbols off of a page, tend to kind of just naturally, group themselves in that manner.
Sure.
And follow that trajectory.
Yeah, that's interesting too. Just to be clear, Ken's views are entirely his own, as are all of ours. So we're not necessarily representing Kaplan or Manhattan Prep or anyone besides ourselves. But yeah, you have deep knowledge in this area, and I think that makes a lot of sense. It is interesting. I was talking to we're going to try to talk to more music educators, and as we have this conversation too, this could probably maybe grow even into its own sort of podcast about music, because I think that'd be really interesting for us to learning and approaches to musical education. But I was talking to some music professors a couple weeks ago and over dinner, and they were saying that similar to what you're saying, there are different approaches to exposing people to music. So it's probably a combination of maybe a natural inclination, and then also how you're introduced to music and how music is part of your life. Because they were very passionate about not regimenting the musical education early, and not almost like a Montessori school kind of orientation towards music, where have musical stuff around the kids and allow the kids to express themselves through music and then guide them to get better, as opposed to the piano recital, the sort of classical training. At a relatively early age, you're sort of measured, your musical ability is measured against some external standard. And these guys are jazz musicians, so I think that they have their own perspective. But but they were saying that they thought that was problematic because they like to improvise and do jazz and understand the sort of even like one of them was looking at the neurology, the neurochemistry of improvisation, and they were finding that like even your brain behaves differently when you're trying to it's almost like reading a teleprompter versus doing improv, so like if it's trying to hit words or reciting a poem versus freestyling,
which we'll do in a moment, right?
Yeah, I'm waiting for you to sing, by the way, Dan, but
there's video evidence.
Yes,
you don't want that.
Maybe a karaoke episode would also be interesting. But we could continue to go on. But just as we're wrapping up this segment, Ken, like one of the things we like to ask our guests, and I imagine we'll have you back on more often. But what trends are you noticing? Like, what are you observing in the world? What's got your attention in terms of emerging trends and things, maybe as they relate to music or they relate to music education?
Well, there's been sort of an explosion in sort of do-it-yourself online music learning services that are being offered.
Yep.
I don't really know much about them. I can tell you that I have a lot of people who have tried those services, sort of become frustrated with them, and as a result have decided to have sought me out.
Yeah.
Have sought out personal instruction as an alternative.
Yep.
So I can't really report on the numbers in terms of how that's being received, but it definitely seems to be a trend.
Right.
I think if I were to have to state a preference for my favorite trend in recent years, it would probably have to be the Guitar Hero trend that sort of swept the world.
Yeah.
I guess a decade ago at this point.
Sure.
And that was very, very good for music teachers.
Yes.
Because every kid was inspired by that.
Yeah.
They come in and they say, "Oh, I'm a really, really good guitar player on Guitar Hero." And that doesn't necessarily translate into actual skills, but
Right.
it does foster an interest.
Yeah, or maybe also guitar, not just the guitar. But Dan, yes.
It just reminds me of your interview with Rohit and his Fender story that he tells about the idea that Fender finally realized that if someone trying to learn guitar learns the song they love first, it sort of opens up their world more than teaching them, hey, play this note, play this rhythm, and then eventually you'll play Down on the Corner or something by Clapton or whatever it might be. So Ken, to your point, the idea of a Guitar Hero kid, just teaching them, whether it's Smoke on the Water or whatever song was on Guitar Hero, maybe start with that and get them to understand how hard it's going to be, but also that they can get there. Just reminded me of the Rohit comment there.
Yeah, so we'll be hearing more, hopefully a lot more from Ken in the future. Hopefully more sound from you in addition to your voice is another thing we're hoping to start incorporating into the show, which will be great. And yeah, thanks to Ken Florence, Kenny Florence, all those things for joining us. And thanks as always to Dan. We'll continue to talk music over the next week or so, and hopefully we'll get some good listener feedback on that. So thanks for listening.